look at the subject today through these verses, rejoicing in the process of spiritual maturity. I think we would all agree that it is our goal to be spiritually mature. It is our desire to be spiritually developed into what God would want us to be. And perhaps some of the most misunderstood or misrepresented verses in the Bible are the ones that we just read. It's not a surprise that the following verse, verse number 5, says, "If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask God." Because truthfully, these verses require some wisdom. And I want to get into these verses here this morning because if these verses are misunderstood, they can cause a Christian to be confused at best and to reject God's word at the worst. Because if you misunderstand this, if you don't understand the joy of temptation, which let's face it, already that can be a confusing idea. If we don't understand this, we can find ourselves just pushing ourselves away saying, I don't understand it, therefore I'm going to avoid it. And if you've read your Bible any amount of time, there are a lot of verses we have to say, I don't fully understand that. Well, it's not our job just to push it away. It's our job to dig, to study, to show ourselves approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed. And so I want to get into the text today with the purpose of properly understanding the context of these verses. We see a few things. We see, first of all, the joy of the Christian. In verse number 2, we see the command. We start off with this command to the Christian, count it all joy. Well, I like joyful things. I like joyful events. I like joyful occasions. I like joyful things. And I'm certainly interested in things that produce joy in the Christian life. I think as Christians, we ought to have joy. And so if he tells us, if he starts off by saying, I'm going to give you something, and I want you to count it all joy. Well, right away, I'm interested. I want this joy of the Christian life. Well, what is it that we're to consider all joy? Well, look what he says in the verse. Count it all joy when ye fall. Well, obviously, the word fall is normally associated with a negative action. I have to honestly say I have never rejoiced over falling physically. I've laughed at others perhaps when they fell physically, but I've never joyed myself in a fall. That's never been a joyous occasion, a joyful thing for me. But he says, I want you to count it all joy. Okay, I'm in so far. I like joy. I like the joy of Christianity. When ye fall. This fall, the word that is given for this statement, when you fall, it is not the idea of tripping or stumbling. I think we would agree that God never would ask us to rejoice when a Christian stumbles. We would never find joy in tripping up spiritually. Matter of fact, that's a very heartbreaking thing, and it's a very terrible thing, and it's a sad thing to see Christians fall. Matter of fact, he goes as far as to say that woe to the one who offends, woe to the one who trips up the Christian. And so this joy of falling is not a spiritual fall that we would think of, and I think that's why these verses get so misunderstood, is because when we see the word fall, we think of a negative action. Well, this statement here that says, when ye fall, it actually means this. It is to be in a place where something there is all around us. It means to be surrounded with. Let me give us some application. I think it will help us. It means to be in a situation in life where you see no way out. There's just no way out. No way to escape. It quite literally means that the situation is out of my control. Has anybody been in this type of situation before? There is no way out. There's no answer. There's no door to go through. It is out of my control. That is the word that is used in this statement, when ye fall. It means to be in a situation where you don't know what to do. Let me give you some Bible examples. This is the Israelites at the Red Sea. Exactly where God wanted them to be, but they see no way out. They're in God's will. They're in obedience. They're doing exactly what God wanted, but yet they find themselves in this situation. where they are surrounded. This is Daniel in the lion's den, in complete obedience, yet finding himself in this situation. This is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fire. This is John on the Isle of Patmos. This is John the Baptist as he is in prison. This is Mary at the foot of the cross. What am I supposed to do? There's nothing that I can do. It is completely out of my control. This is the Shunammite woman holding her son. Out of my control. This is the Christian who is battling their health. This is the godly wife who takes care of her sick husband. This is the godly family in God's will, but struggling financially. I think we can understand there are a lot of times that God puts us in a place and in a situation where we really don't know what to do. And this is the context of the word that is used when ye fall. You find yourself surrounded. There's no way of escape. The situation is out of my control. Well, he goes on, and perhaps this is again why there's some confusion. He says, when ye fall, that is, when you find yourself surrounded with in diverse temptations. That word diverse is where we get our word diversity. It just means a variety of different types. The Red Sea was not the lion's den, and the lion's den was not the fire, but yet all of them were situations that would fit into this definition. The word here for temptation, again, we think of this word as a negative word, and we're going to see that because, matter of fact, look at chapter 1 here in verse number 13. We're going to look at this in 3 or 4 messages from now. But he says, let no man say when he is tempted, here's the same word, I am tempted of God, for God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempteth he any man. So here we have find it all joy when you find it diverse temptations. Then over here he says, God doesn't tempt you. Well, which one is it? Well, we have 2 different words that are used here. And the one for temptation in chapter 1, verse number 2, it means putting to proof discipline. It means a place where we as Christians are required to be disciplined. In James chapter number 1 and verse number 2, this is the type of situation that takes the Christian. I'm going to need some help today. One of you boys want to help me? All right, come on up. We're going to use our imagination. This is going to be a Christian. All right. No, I'm just kidding. He's a good kid. This type of temptation, I'm glad I didn't get Levi to do this. This is the type of temptation that picks up the Christian and puts him in a situation. That's what God does to us sometimes. Out of our control. Nothing we could have done to prevent it. Nothing we can do to get out of it. Matter of fact, when we're in it, we're surrounded. I don't even know what to do. Everybody understand this picture of the children at the Red Sea and Daniel? They didn't put themselves there. God put them there. This is the word that is used in this type of word, this word temptation. It is to prove discipline. It places you inside a situation. The situation is all around you. You are surrounded by this situation. You could say that God puts you in a box with no doors. You wake up and you find yourself saying, God, what did I do to deserve this? God, how did I get in this? And this is where a lot of Christians find themselves saying, did I do something wrong to end up here? Did I do something bad? Is this because I've sinned? Well, we've all sinned, and we certainly can't say that no trouble is a result of sin, but truth is many times right in the middle of God's will, people wake up in this situation where they're surrounded by their situation and there's literally nothing they can do. Well, there's one thing, but we don't like that. It's that 4-letter word, wait. Wait. Does anybody enjoy waiting? No, not me either. But when you're in that situation, that's all you can do. It doesn't matter if you want to or not. That's all you can do. You wait. So we find ourselves describing and trying to figure out this word temptation. Well, when we look at temptation, chapter 1 and verse number 13, we have a different word. This word, temptation, means to test objectively, to scrutinize, or to tempt. Let me give you an example of this. Who wants to help me? All right, twin number 2. Okay, you're going to stand over here. Okay? And just over there by the piano. You've heard about it for years, folks. And now you get to see it. It is a carrot on a stick. Yes. Honestly, when I put this together, it didn't fit the hype for all those years. This is the temptation it's talking about in chapter 1, verse 13. This is the temptation for you to act and do something you shouldn't do. Hey, right? Everybody with me? Hey, come with us. Do this. Doesn't that look good? Come on, come on. See, the saying should have been chocolate on a stick, right? The state fairs had it right. Yeah. Twinkie on a stick. Whatever. But carrot, why? I don't know. But this is the word tempt. It literally means to set before and test. See, God doesn't do this. God doesn't put sin before you and say, oh, come on, you want to sin? You want to do that? No, God doesn't do that. That's what it's talking about. And we'll get more into this, but that's chapter 1, verse 13. He tempteth no man with evil. But these are the two words. One, and here's the difference. This is what we have to recognize. One, you are placed in a situation and you are commanded, wait. The other is in a situation where they're asking you, come on. Come on, you know you want it. You know you do. That doesn't look good to you? Want me to, don't touch? You want, maybe if I shaved it, then you'd like it? Okay, all right, next week. Next week. It means to test. This one over here puts you in a situation and says, wait. Or this one over here puts you in a situation and says, let's go. And here's what I want you to notice about this is you can face, don't get confused on this because I'll give you the illustration. You can face temptation while in temptation. Two different words. God puts you in a situation where you're struggling financially, then you get COVID, you miss 2 weeks, and they don't pay you for it. That's a tough situation. You know what? While you're in this, where God has placed you, the devil has no mercy. Oh, come on. Just do this. We'd be foolish in our world today not to recognize how often people consider suicide and actually, you know what that is? When people are in a difficult situation, the devil comes along and says, come on. One is of God and one is not. We will regularly find ourselves throughout the Christian life in this situation. And we will regularly in our Christian life find ourselves in this situation. And we would be wise to recognize the difference. Very much so. You guys can be seated for now. Thank you very much. Put this away before you eat it. We are told to count it all joy when we find ourselves in this situation. Not the wrong situation. And this is where people get this confused. Why am I supposed to count it all joy when I'm tempted? Well, you don't understand the proper definition. Because we don't find it all joy when sin hangs in front of us. We don't find it all joy when we fall to that sin and we fall to that temptation and we fall to those desires. We never count that all joy. But rather, when we find ourselves in this situation where God has picked us up and placed us in a situation, it's out of our control. We didn't do anything to get here. This is God's plan, God's desire. It is God's will. We don't always understand it, but we accept it that God has chosen to put me in this place. Therefore I rejoice because I'm here not of my own making, but rather it is God who has put me here. Well, still, I think we would all agree, what's to rejoice about it? Okay, I can be glad that it's God doing it, but it still doesn't look like a great situation. Well, why should we rejoice? This brings us to number 2, the purpose of the temptation. Look at verse number 3. He says we're going to count it all joy in verse number 2 when you fall into these. So when you wake up and you find yourself in this situation, here's what it's doing. You know this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience, but let patience have her perfect work. You know what you have as an option over here? We already talked about it. Wait. But I want to climb out of this. I know. I want a way out. I want to look at my options. I mean, if things aren't going right, we have to change something. We have to adjust something. Could it be that God has placed you here because you need some patience? Could it be that God has a plan for you? But how many times we get placed in this and we scratch and we crawl and we climb, we do everything we can, not understanding that it is God who has us here? And if you haven't learned this as a Christian, you can fight a lot against God and you're not going to win. You will not win. So we're going to look at the purpose. Here's the purpose. Number 1, faith is tried. Your faith is tried. Now please get this. This does not say your flesh is tried. That would be over here. All right, everybody follow along with this? It does not say your pride is tried. That would be over here. Pride of life, lust of the eyes, and lust of the flesh. That's this. But in this is how you can tell the difference. But in this situation, it is your faith that is being tried. In this situation, you can ask yourself, how much do I trust God? Oof. Because truth is, I know this situation and I know how much I trust flesh. I know how much I trust pride. But sometimes we have to be put in a situation where we ask, how much do we trust God? Our faith is tried. When I'm in the Red Sea situation, when I'm in the lion's den situation, when I'm in that health or that financial situation, my faith is tried. Am I going to trust God? Just stay obedient, be where I'm supposed to be, do what I'm supposed to do, and just trust God in my situation, because I am surrounded and I don't see a way out, but it is God who has put me here, and therefore I trust Him. Boy, our faith is tried, isn't it? Many times as the leader of our homes, if we go through financial trouble, our faith is tried as men. We want to fix it. We want to do better. If our marriage is a little on the rocks, boy, we want to fix it. We want to change. We worry. We stress. All these things. We want to fix it. And the same when we put in these situations, our health or our finances or just a trouble of life, we want to fix it. We want to make a door where there's not a door. But instead he says you just need to wait. Why? Because this type of tribulation, this type of temptation tries our faith. Okay, so what's the product of a tried faith? Well, he continues. He says that the trying of your faith worketh patience. Our patience is worked. What's the purpose of temptation? Well, our faith is tried and our patience is worked. Or another word would be exercised. I don't like to wait. I want to see a way out. I want to escape. How long will this last? I've heard that many times, people in these type of situations. Well, I just don't know that I can, and here's what they'll say, I just don't know that I can do it any longer. And many times I don't say it, but I often think, do what any longer? Trust God? Because if it's that type of a situation, you must wait on God. I don't know if I can do it any longer. I don't know if I can wait anymore. I don't know if I can continue in this. And what they're saying is, I don't see a way out. I don't see the answer. I'm in this situation where it's out of my control, and all I have to do is trust God, and I don't know if I can. I think we would all agree that's a good indication that we need spiritual growth. And so we see the patience is worked. Third thing that happens, the purpose of the temptation, the work is complete. Look what he says in verse number 4, but let patience have her perfect work. Please note this. The victory is not in experiencing patience, but letting patience have her perfect work. Letting patience fulfill its plan. I want to turn to a couple of verses to kind of see the value of this. Go to Genesis chapter number 22. Genesis chapter number 22, in the first couple of verses, we're going to see this word tempt, where God tempts Abraham. Well, now we know according to chapter 1, verse 13, that God tempts no man, so that already tells us what kind of temptation this is, right? It's not the hanging sin over him, but rather he's putting him in a situation where he has nothing to do but to trust God and to rely on God. In Genesis chapter 22 and verse number 1, it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham and said unto him, Abraham, he said, behold, here I am. And he said, take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains, which I will tell thee of. What? You know what that is? God's picking up Abraham, and he's setting him in a situation where he has two options: obey God and trust God, or disobey God. Obey God and trust him, or disobey. Well, I don't know why God would ask Abraham to do that. I don't know why God asks a lot of things. But I've learned it's always best to trust him. And so this is the temptation. Well, what is the completion? What is the perfect work? Well, look at verse number 10 of this same chapter, Genesis 22. And Abraham stretched forth his hand and took the knife to slay his son. And the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, here am I. And he said, lay not thine hand upon thy lad, neither do thou anything unto him. For now I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in a thicket by his thorns. You know what that is? Patience had its perfect work. That's the completion. You see, Abraham could have looked for a door himself, but God had a door at the end of this. God had a way. God had a plan. And so the patience is in trusting God, obeying God, and trusting God. And then in God's timing, when the work is complete, that door is open and the answer is revealed. We see this when the Red Sea parted. Patience had its perfect work. What are we going to do? The Egyptians are on one side and the Red Sea is here. We don't know what to do. It's out of our control. Now keep in mind, God protected them while they were here with that pillar of fire. The Egyptians couldn't get there, but they didn't know what to do. They didn't know where to go. They were surrounded. They were in this situation, and God put them there. Well, then that Red Sea parted, and they got to walk through on dry land. You know what that was? The work was being complete. Patience had the perfect work. When Daniel was released from the lion's den, when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were let out of that fire, patience had its perfect work. Now listen to this. When John the Baptist was martyred, patience had its perfect work. Patience doesn't always lead to the answer we want, does it? But I'll tell you this, when John the Baptist woke up in paradise, he realized that was the perfect work. Doesn't always go the way we want, doesn't always go the way that we think it should, but we trust God until the answer is revealed. In Psalm chapter 27, we won't turn there for time's sake. You see, David gives a list of troubles that he went through, and he got to the end, and he pleads with his people, and he said, "Had it not, I would have fainted." And he says, I was in a situation out of my control. And he said, I would have fainted had I not seen the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. And then he gives advice and instruction in verse number 14 of chapter 27. Wait, I say on the Lord, wait. You know what he's encouraging us? When you find yourself in this situation, wait. Be patient. Because God does have a door. God does have a plan. And when we're in this situation, our faith is tried, and that faith being tried works patience in us. And if we will wait, and if we will let God do what he wants, that patience has its perfect work. That is the purpose of the temptation, for patience to have its perfect work in us. Well, what is the spiritual maturity that is defined in this? And that's number 3, spiritual maturity is defined. What's the product of patience having its perfect work? Look what it says in back in James chapter number 1. Verse number 4, he says, let patience have its work. Notice how this is revolving from you are in this temptation. Faith is tried, patience is worked. Well, what does this come back to? Look what he says in verse number 4 in the middle of the verse there. Let patience have her perfect work, that ye, this is about you and your spiritual growth, that ye may be perfect and entire, wanting nothing. That ye may be. This is a personal effect of the temptation and the patience. And what we don't realize is when we're in this situation, we don't see a way out, we don't see the door, we don't see the answer, and patience is starting to kick in. Our faith is being tried, patience is being complete, and then when God opens that door and we walk through, we find ourselves that God didn't just do a work on our faith, and God didn't just do a work on our patience. God did something for us personally so that we can be better Christians and better servants for him. And in our moment of what is going on, God is molding us and shaping us into what he wants us to be. Well, I didn't see that coming. We very seldomly do. But yet God uses it to build. Let me ask you this. Do you think that the Israelites' faith increased a little bit, or their spiritual growth grew a little bit when they came across that dry land on the Red Sea? You think Daniel, he was already a man who believed. You think he trusted God a little bit more when he came through that den of lions? You think Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they already trusted God. But don't you think it grew, and they grew as individuals as God brought them out of that? Absolutely. And the very same thing happens to us. We grow spiritually. Let's look at these 3 words in this, and then we'll be done. The spiritual maturity is defined. The first word is the word perfect. This simply means completed. It means the plan worked. It was fulfilled. Let me give you an illustration of this. Up in Sunday school, Miss Kendra may ask her children to cut out hearts. So they all fold their paper and they cut hearts out and they all get done. And Miss Kendra, because they did what they asked, she says, perfect. Now, every heart doesn't look the same. Every heart definitely would not be perfectly symmetrical. Every heart might not look like a heart. But why does she say perfect? Not because it's without flaw, but because her plan was accomplished. Her vision was fulfilled. They can now move on because I've done that. I've asked people set up tables and chairs, and many people here, we need to set up tables, chairs, we need to do this. We come in, it's put together, perfect. Does it mean every chair is perfectly in its place? Does it mean every table is without flaw? No, of course not. It means the desire was fulfilled. And when we allow patience to have its perfect work, and we wait for God to open that door, when we walk out, God can say, it was fulfilled. That's the word perfect. The plan was completed. Patience was completed, and now the work that God was doing inside of us was completed. When patience has its perfect work, it does in us as God has planned, as God had hoped, as God has intended. Just like when they cut those hearts, it was as she had hoped and as she had intended and as she had planned. That's what can happen for us when we let patience have its perfect work. The second word is the word entire. The word here is actually a word that is used for the completion of a puzzle. It's entire. It's done. It's like a home with the final piece of trim on. It's done. It's entire. It is as it needs to be. Now, this doesn't mean there won't be maintenance. This doesn't mean there won't be issues that come up. It doesn't mean there won't be an addition to come on later. But for now, it is what God wants. It is entire. It is complete. And then we see that phrase, wanting nothing. Perfectly content. Let me explain something about being trapped between Egyptians and the Red Sea. When you finally get through, you're pretty happy about it. Let me tell you something about being in a lion's den. Thank God this is not from experience. But when you get out of there, you're pretty content. See, many times in life, we don't get put in those situations and we find ourselves discontent because we don't realize the struggles that we could be going through and the situations we could find ourselves in. The person who is discontent because they can't have this car or that car, they have no clue about the person over here struggling because they have to take the bus everywhere because they can't get a car. See, you get through that situation, all of a sudden, you find yourself content. He says he find himself wanting nothing, perfectly content. When they crossed the Red Sea, they were wanting nothing. When he got out of the lion's den, he was wanting nothing. When the Shunammite woman's son came alive, she didn't want anything else. I'm happy. This is what I was wanting. I am rejoicing because I am out of this time of this temptation. When Jesus was resurrected, Mary was wanting nothing. The other things of life really didn't matter because she got out of this situation that she saw no way out of. And so she finds herself perfectly content. There is complete satisfaction in the work of the Lord for the Christian who allows patience to have her perfect work. So that we have questions. What will I do when I find myself in this type of temptation? What will I do? When I can say, there's nothing I can do, it's out of my control. Well, if it's out of my control, there's not much use in scratching and clawing and climbing. There's not much use in fighting. There's not much use in laying down and crying. There's not much use in complaining. I am here. God is the one who set me here, and there's really not much I can do about it. So here's what I will do. I will rejoice that I know a door is going to open. I'll rejoice that I know there is a way out. I'll rejoice that God does have a plan. And in the meantime, I'm going to wait patiently knowing that I am protected by God, and when he opens that door, I will be glad to walk through and say, thank God that's over, and thank you, God, for getting me through another situation. We grow spiritually as a result, but only if we let patience have her perfect work. Then you may be perfect, wanting nothing, complete. Boy, what a great promise this is. It doesn't mean, and please know this as we finish up, it does not mean that when we're in this, we don't have to ask God for grace. It doesn't mean we don't have to ask God for strength. It doesn't mean we don't have to ask God for rest. It doesn't mean we don't have to ask God for his mercy. This is not a sit back in a lawn chair and saying, well, I'm glad everything's miserable because one day God will get me through. Because in this, we do need strength, and we do need mercy, and we need grace. We need all that God offers us. But thank God he offers it to us. And so when we find ourselves in this situation, let's not fight, let's not kick, let's say, God, I need your help. You put me here, and I'll wait here as long as you want me to, because I want to be the Christian that you want me to be.